Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. We are live today in the back room somewhere here at Cross the Line Church, and we are excited today. We're gonna, as people log on, we are gonna address some questions that we have gotten from you over the last couple of weeks, both in our inboxes and email and stuff like that. So. We may not be able to get to every one of them today, but we will get to some of them today. We're going to talk about a couple topics. And the great thing about today is we have a very special guest. Douglas Hamp is with us today. So I'm going to bring him on. Hello,
Hey.
Doug.
Hey. This is awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. In case you didn't know, Doug was at Cross the Line Church not that long ago, right?
Yeah, back in November. That was good.
November, and we had a great time. Had some great small group discussions out at some restaurants, and where Doug entertained us for a while, asking questions.
That was fun.
Yeah, it was a great time, and we hope to do that again. We wanted them to like us good enough to come back someday. So, but we have them on today, and we're gonna ask some questions. Because there are a lot of things predominant, I think, probably, as you know, Cross the Line is an independent Christian church, Restoration Movement church, and so a lot of those churches, while we function independently, we are connected by a series of Bible colleges and stuff, and it causes one of the things that I guess is a good thing. Is that guys have different views, and we focus on the unity of the salvation points and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But across the, evangelical church in America, revelation is a huge issue, I think. Everybody that I have in a class wants to do a class about revelation, right?
Right.
And so until you get in the middle of it, and they're like, "Huh, what does that mean?" But
yeah.
But one of the things that seems to come across with pastors, because a lot of times when people go to 4 or 5 years of Bible college, they come out equipped maybe to lead a church, but maybe not experts in biblical language, being able to parse out verses and stuff, which is something that I think that we could use you for today.
Sure.
And so I was hoping, I think one of the things that people try to do, I think there's two groups, and I might be wrong about this, but I've identified a lot of the same people that like to make a accommodation for the gap theory in Genesis, maybe take a less literal view of Genesis to support their views in academia or whatever. They also want to believe that a lot of revelation ended in 70 AD.
Right.
And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and where the confusion comes in, or just kind of bring us why that's not, why what we read, that wasn't 70 AD.
Yeah, so that's typically called the Preterist View. Preterist means historical. And so the whole idea is that that pretty much most, if not all, of Revelation and most, if not all, of Matthew 24, Luke 21, these are the passages that are speaking about the time of the Great Tribulation, etc., that those were fulfilled in 70 AD. And I really dislike the whole theory, because what it does principally is it throws the Jews under the bus, and it says that Jesus came back. So this would be, just so people know, there's different views of preterism. So a full, what do they call themselves? Consistent preterist. They would say that Jesus came back on the dust clouds of the Roman army. I don't know. I've got a problem with that because when the Roman army marched into Jerusalem, they were not there to save Israel. They were there to destroy principally Jerusalem and, of course, the Jewish people. That was their target. So preterism at the first instance here is already against the Jewish people. Now, look, we know that when Jesus left, the leadership of Jerusalem had some issues with him, and he had some issues with them. And he said that you will not see my face again until you say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Right? So that was a promise. That was an ultimatum, if you will. Like, you guys aren't going to see me until you say this. So that tells you something, that there's an opportunity, not for those individual men because they're dead, but for the corporate body that is the leadership of Jerusalem. They have an opportunity to make things right, shall we say, and to welcome Jesus, to say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So the preterist doctrine says that everything was fulfilled back then. Jesus came, he destroyed the Jewish people, and they've been under a curse ever since. I would strongly disagree with that. I think there's just lots and lots of holes. And here's what the preterists do, is they like to take some of the events hyper literally, and then when they get to the book of Revelation, they say, well, it's just it's apocalyptic literature, and so we shouldn't take anything literally. And I think that is a huge error. I spent 1 year and 4 months going through the book of Revelation. A little too long there, but I figured I was in no rush, and I'm glad I did. It was fantastic. It was good for me. I think it was good for the church to just dive deep and say, okay, what do these things mean? And as you know, I came and I shared at your church that a lot of the symbols in the book of Revelation, they have meanings that we can figure out. And liken it to this, we all have symbols around us each and every day. When we're driving on the street, we see a red light. What does that tell us? Well, what does it tell us, right? It's very symbolic, right? So we know that, but we know, because we studied, that red means stop, right? Yellow means slow down, or goes faster, depending how you look at it. And green means go, right? So, we understand what the symbols mean because we studied them. So it would be absolutely incorrect to say that, we have no idea what a red light means. Yes, we do. Right? We studied that. And so the symbols in the book of Revelation, we're able to decode those because we can go back. That's one of the things I did in my book, Corrupting the Image 2, is we can go back and say, let's get back to some bedrock. And what is the great dragon? What is the woman that rides the beast? What is the beast that was, is not, and will ascend out of the abyss? Are there ways that we can figure out what these mean? And once we get back to that bedrock, bedrock is where you can't go down any further. That's absolute foundation. And I discovered that when we look at the ancient Sumerian, ancient Akkadian literature, it's talking very specifically about the great dragon, a red dragon, mind you, a beast that was, is not, and will ascend out of the abyss, a woman that's riding a beast. I mean, these symbols are all over the ancient world, but we've forgotten because they were buried and they're not part of our world. So we've kind of forgotten these things. And so then what happens is people then start to take the book incredibly allegorically and they say it's nothing but metaphor. I'm not going to say that there's no metaphor in there, but I think there's a lot of literal stuff. Okay. So, but again, and some of it, we just need to understand that this is a symbol, this dragon. What does that mean? And I was able to figure out that it goes all the way back to Satan, right? I mean, the book of Revelation tells us that, but it's pretty cool that we can find these ancient symbols in the ancient world that are really decoding what the book of Revelation is about. And so, I'm not to say that there's a conspiracy or people are lazy. I just think that as time went on, people had less access to source material. I mean, think about it. We are so blessed to have computers and the internet, and we can look stuff up in a split second. We can have the world's libraries at our fingertips. Well, people before the internet and all kinds of stuff didn't have that. And so stuff was lost. And I think God is really opening our minds and helping us to study and see things to be able to put these pieces back together. So, yeah.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody let's say somebody takes the view of Revelation and there's different, obviously when I was in Bible college, I think one of the papers that we had to write was like, okay, you're all millennial, you're post millennial, you're premillennial, you're dispensational. I think that people that take some of what you just talked about, some of the mistakes, they'll say that Nero was in fact meets all the qualifications for the Antichrist, and that the Christians that day that they knew that, or something like that. Have you heard that said before? Or
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it fails, first of all. So what they do is they take the word Nero, they make it Neron, and then they're trying to get his name out of that.
okay, so just for people that did that slip by, right? What you just did right there.
Yeah.
Do that slower, because that's super. I think little things like that are super important when we make, because again, I'd like to reiterate, a lot of times when we go to Bible college, when guys that end up with the title pastor at some church, right? They're not biblical linguists. They actually don't do ancient languages very well at all. Maybe if they take them for a year, like if you took, like when the high school kid takes Spanish for 2 years in their high school, right? They might be able to figure out some things, but I think that's a difference. So if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and do that again for our listeners. Because I think
absolutely. That's so right. So this has to do with the mark of the beast, okay? And what people are doing when they're suggesting that it was all fulfilled and that Nero is actually the fulfillment of that. They're suggesting that he has become, again, that he fulfills it essentially. Okay, so I'm actually writing about this in my new book, Corrupting Image Volume 3, and I talk about how this is based on gematria. All right, so the whole idea of gematria is that every letter represents a number. All right, and so for what people need to do is they need to take Nero Caesar, right? It's not just Nero, but it's Nero Caesar. So it's Neron Caesar. And when they do that and they apply every Hebrew letter and its corresponding value, then they come up with 666. But I really think that they're digging for things instead of finding things. This is what we call eisegesis versus exegesis. We want to exegete something.
Yeah.
And when you have to take Caesar, Nero, you got to take both of those to make 666. I think that's absolutely a dangerous way to go. And then what can happen is then you can start making anybody fit the bill. And people have done this throughout history. They're doing it even today. You find a politician you don't like. Well, guess what? I just figured out that her name or his name means 666. You're like, well, it doesn't actually. Well, yeah, but if you put Senator so-and-so, then it means 666. If you say President so-and-so, then it means 666.
Yeah, math is funny like
cherry picking. It's terrible.
Yeah, math is interesting like that. We can kind of add enough to get back to a multiple that we could do 666. Well, do you run into some other things that you're seeing in Revelation where nobody fits the bill there for the beast, or what many people refer to as the Antichrist as well?
So what's the question?
So we have people that basically try to take and get 666 out of Nero. But I think that do you find that in just some regular conversation stuff that would be easy? Do you find there's some other reasons he doesn't foot the bill of what we see in Revelation or Daniel?
Well, yeah. I mean, so Jesus said that when you see the abomination standing in the holy place where it ought not be, get out of Jerusalem. All right. So first of all, if Nero were the Antichrist, which he's not, but if he were, did he ever go into the Holy of Holies? I don't remember that. Not at all. Right. He just never went into the holy place, and people didn't run away when they saw Nero go into the temple. If Nero had walked into the temple and said, "I am God," then we would have a open and shut case, right? But we don't, because he never went to Israel. He never made it there. All All right, so that's certainly one of the things. And then it tells us that everybody on the face of the earth is going to be forced to decide whether they take the mark of the beast or they don't take the mark of the beast. And it's going to be on their right hand or on their forehead. I don't remember anything about Nero making people take the mark of the beast, right? It just wasn't there. And again, if he's the Antichrist, who was his false prophet? Don't remember that either. And we're told that his false prophet, and presumably the Antichrist, will have the ability to call down fire from heaven, right? This is a pretty big deal that they're going to do. And they're going to kill the 2 witnesses whose bodies are going to be lay dead for 3.5 days in the city of Jerusalem. None of that happened. But this is where the preterists like to say, well, Rome surrounded Jerusalem and that happened literally. And I'm like, yeah, it did. But all these other things didn't happen. So we've it's all or nothing when it comes to prophecy. It's either all that it's fulfilled and we can say this is done, or it's not. And there's some other fulfillment of that we have to look for.
Yeah, I think that we get a real impasse. I think there's a real effort, both in, and I know this is two different subjects, but there's a real effort in I think Christian academia to hit some type of middle road. And the middle road happens to be, at least right now, they don't want to argue evolution. And so the day-age theory, and then you do all kinds of weird things with Genesis. I probably had more weird things said to me by pastors in the last year about Genesis. Just trying to allegorize, I guess, the whole, like, large parts of it that I think in watching, reading your books and watching your videos that you don't as well. But then I feel like it goes along with this other idea that we see. Well, we're just basically waiting on the very last part of Revelation. We're just somehow we've had a millennial reign and you've missed it. And my idea with that is, where did the millennial reign happen? Right. Where did it exist? You don't see peace with Christian Jews. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. Is it now because the Christians in northern Sudan seem to be suffering, or different places in the world? Where's the millennial reign of Christ? It's figurative, where the message of Christ goes unhindered, without Satan's obstruction. Well, the death of Christians seems to be a way to obstruct the message.
It sure does.
I mean, yeah. At what point in history do we ever see an unobstructed missionary, whether he goes to people who are involved in cannibals, or we're seeing the Muslims wipe out the Byzantine Christians, or whatever in history, whatever. If it's a government that doesn't like them. Right. Communism that says no Christianity because it's going to teach some type of freedom. Where do we see the millennial reign? It has to get real Casper-esque. It's real in the clouds.
Right.
I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great point. And when Jesus comes back, he is going to establish his kingdom. And there's some very definite markers that we can look at. Is that, first of all, people are going to have extended lives. If you die at 100, you're considered a child and a sinner, right? There's something wrong with you because you died at 100, right? That's the first thing. Then we also told that.
I'm sorry, you're talking about the millennial reign. This is the Bible describing the millennial reign and how it's going to be, right? Okay, right. Just for people that may
Isaiah
not
65, it's right in there. It also tells us that that the wolf and the lamb are going to lie down together, and that the young child is going to put his hand in the cobra's den, or the asp's den, right? We don't see that. Who's going to let their child play by the snake hole and put their hand in there? A really bad parent, that's who, right? Because the child is going to die. Just look at the incredible infestation of snakes that they're having in Florida right now, because they were pets. You wouldn't let your little child just run around the Everglades, because it's deadly, right? And so the thing is, are we going to take these things literally, or are they all figurative? If they're all figurative, well, then you can make the Bible say really anything you want. But, I mean, why would we not take a lamb and a wolf lying down together? It's conceivably possible. In fact, we do see those occasional pictures where, animals are not eating each other at the same moment, but they're pretty far and few between. Even the guys who were lion whisperers and all these things, it's like, they had like 10 good years and then suddenly the lion kills them. Right? So
I think I just saw a video about that.
Right. I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's how it goes. So we're not seeing this universal peace that the Bible talks very clearly about that will continue for 1,000 years. And that's another reason that preterism just cannot be true. It's terribly false.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with that. But I do think there are many. I want to touch on things today that I see guys who are very successful in the ministry, who may have large churches, but do have some things that I think we need to tighten up across the Christian church. Totally, and they can disagree. It's cool. We can still be friends. But I think many of the things that we're discussing are left to chance. And really, I think some people say, well, there's really no way to know, right? When you get into this, I'm going to make all of Genesis an allegory, or I'm going to take Revelation, and who could know? And they're not matching the verses up that we see in Daniel or any other place, and they're not finding these symbols. Take, for instance, some of the symbols that you've actually been able to locate and put in your book, where the symbols. I mean, I was just watching the Zack Snyder director's cut with my third son, Superman, and the things flying around, right, from the other planet that's coming to take over Earth, kind of remind me of this winged creatures that are going to come out of the pit, right?
Right.
And so I think what we did was we said, well, it's demonic beings. That can be figurative. But then you've done the real work to find images of, no, here's a literal image that they used to put on a wall in Samaria, someplace, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Give me a second. I'll actually pull that up so people can see what it is that we're talking about, because I think seeing is believing.
I think there's a difference between just believing that, well, who cares? I think it matters, because you do have these teachings where you are morphing parts of the Bible that don't look like allegory. It doesn't look like a song or music, right? But yet people take it that way. Let's see. Do I just have to add that?
Yes, you do. Okay. Right. So this is not entirely what you were talking about, but it's very much related. You can see the beast. On the back of the beast is a woman, which is Ishtar. She represents lust. Behind the beast in the chariot is Enlil, who is Satan. This is the basic plan of the ages right there. It's pretty crazy, right? So this is from a cylinder seal, which is about from 2300, 2200 BC. So it goes back a long way. That these symbols are incredibly old, and we just haven't been looking for them, sadly.
So somebody that would read Revelation and would start reading some of the things that we think, okay, this is an allegory, this is something we can't know this, and then we finally, when we start digging things up, we say, here is something that the ancient world would have known about and seen, maybe all over. Maybe I've seen them all over.
Right. I got another picture I want to show everybody.
Yeah. Let's do it.
So this is, can you see that?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's a cylinder seal impression. I have another picture, but it's harder to see because it's on stone. So this is much easier to see. Okay. This is from Uruk, which is, the date is somewhat up in the air, but probably around 3000 BC, something like that. And so this is a hybridized creature. It's related to the beast that I just showed in the previous picture. That beast was called the Anzu bird, and it represented both Nergal, Ninurta, and Enlil. So basically, let's call it the king of the underworld. That's probably the easiest way to put it. All right. And you can see here that it has the front hooves are like a horse, right? The back legs are the talons of an eagle. It has a scorpion's tail. It has wings. It has a man with a bow and an arrow. And you can't see this entirely, but in other pictures it's clearer. It has two heads. One is a man's head and one is a lion's head. All right. So what I did in the book, in Corrupting the Image 2, in case people are curious what it looks like.
Buy that book. You should.
There you go. That's right. Great book. So what I did is I went through Revelation chapter 9, and I showed that if you take all the descriptions in Revelation 9, they match perfectly that creature, right? And so that is the creature that's going to come out of the abyss, according to the book of Revelation chapter 9. That's what's coming out of the abyss, and it just so happens that in the ancient world, in ancient Mesopotamia, they believed that beings like that existed in the underworld. So you kind of put these together. They thought those creatures existed in the underworld. The Bible says the underworld is going to open up and they're going to come out. So it seems like to me you got a match, right?
I think the problem is, and I think we're seeing it start to emerge right now with ancient alien theory and some of the discoveries of UFOs and things like that. We're seeing an emergent problem with the church, and I was talking about it years ago in youth ministry because I could see our kids going to college and learning this in the classroom. When adults thought it was funny, like a funny idea. I'm not saying they thought it was funny, but they thought it was a ridiculous idea. I think the problem is that we have well-intentioned people who baptize a ton of Christians every year, but basically they're ignorant of what the ancient world thought and what they would have known while reading Revelation. And I think that's one of the things that you've been so great at pointing out. Hey, here are actual images. And like I think of it like this, right? So like a couple thousand years ago, when John is when they're writing their books and things like that, and they're talking about end times, let's say I've seen this image on 300 different things. Say we're involved in false, we're involved in pagan worship, we're involved in satanic worship at the Grotto of Pan, right, in Israel, in Caesarea Philippi, or I go, to Tyre, right, where we see the prophets of Baal in the battle there. Those people, when they read the book of Revelation, they maybe have seen this image depicted different ways tons of times, and they know exactly what the author's talking about. We read it, separated up, continents moved over, the Bible going from at least Greek to English, if not Greek to Latin to English, or, however we're getting it, depending on where we're at in the world. And we just don't know what they knew, right? In some cases. And so we say, early man, stupid, right? He's a man, or this is a spiritual thought. They didn't really see these things. But then we find people that said, no, look, here's an image, exactly what we see in Revelation. And I just think I think at one point, maybe we have a little bit too much pride. When we look at Revelation and Genesis, we think we know. We think, okay, somebody figured out that this was an allegory. I respected them. They won a lot of people to Christ. And because of that, I'm not going to change, who cares, or whatever. That's kind of the attitude. Do you run into that a little bit? Or, because you do this type of discussion all the time. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, you can definitely have it that, well, Pastor so-and-so said such and such. And you're like, well, okay. God bless the man, right? That's wonderful. But it doesn't mean that it's necessarily based in scholarship. And I think sometimes we use the Holy Spirit as a way to be lazy, right? I mean, I think the Spirit is going to teach us things that we need to know about daily living. Lord, should I go this direction and do ministry, or that kind of stuff, right? He obviously
Right.
God is God and he leads, but he doesn't always do the homework for us, right? If that were the case, we wouldn't need Bible software. Because God would just directly impart it and download it into our brains. But he doesn't do that. He expects us to study. We're even commanded to study to show ourselves approved, right? I mean, I wish I could just download it like the Matrix and I got the Bible. That'd be awesome. But that's not how it works. So, when it comes to a lot of these questions, yeah, you can have a very successful pastor who is sharing good stuff about Jesus, but very ignorant in other areas. Take, for example, one of the things that I believe that we should not allegorize the creation story. It's interesting that before Edwin Hubble, the predominant theory about the universe was a static universe. In other words, it always existed, right?
Yeah.
And now we would like, oh, that's ridiculous. But that's what people used to think before Edwin Hubble. And then, he's doing his stargazing and all this different stuff, looking through telescopes. And what does he notice? He notices a redshift. The redshift is because light has been stretched. And so it's kind of like when you hear an ambulance go by and it, wee, 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 right? And it changes that Doppler effect. That's the same basic idea of the light stretching. And what he figured out is that, well, if it's stretching and it's now getting elongated, that means that it used to be closer together. If you just run the tape backwards, what do you get? Then you come back to this moment called the Big Bang, right? And that was actually something that I forget the guy's name who came up with that title, but it was actually a pejorative, right? Oh, what do you got, a Big Bang, But now that is the predominantly accepted theory, and I think that they were onto something. I basically agree with them. Maybe not how long it took, but the basic thing, I would say, yeah. And of course, God created it, right? But that you have a stretching out of the universe. And guess what God said in Isaiah, the book of Isaiah? He said that, this is the one who stretches out the heavens, right? So the prophet Isaiah was already well onto this idea long before Edwin Hubble looked through his telescopes to see that redshift. And then people began to understand. But, when you take all of the entire universe, you scrunch it back together, including space, and they all get it back into this tiny little dot, and that everything was contained therein. And then you ask, well, where was the dot? If space was in the dot, then where was the dot? They say, well, it's in hyperspace, right? I mean, you're like, wait, hyperspace? Are you serious? Like, now they're having to say, well, all of the known universe and space itself was condensed into a tiny little dot. Where was that? It was in a different dimension. I'm like, well, now we're just getting right back to the Bible, right? Because if we're getting back to that and we're just going to talk about different dimensions, well, the Bible talks about different dimensions clearly. So we're back to where the Bible already where it already started, and I've given a lot of thought to the age of the universe. And what really excites me, and I'd love to write a book on this one day, but if I have time, is the whole concept of cosmic expansion. And so what I was talking about is that, if you run the tape backwards, then you come up with a little dot. But then if you run it forwards, that means that everything, including space, started to expand like a balloon. Okay. And what they're saying is that the expansion rate of the balloon of the universe is expanding faster than the speed of light. That has profound implications. All right. So let's say we expand our universe this big. To go from here to Earth to the known edge of the universe would take us about 15 billion years, because if we could travel at the speed of light. All right. That's how long it would take to traveling that fast. But the universe itself is actually expanding faster than the speed of light. Really interesting. So again, if we run our tape backwards, that means that the whole expansion rate happened much faster than 15 billion years, right? Because when it was back here, right, the light would travel, but now where it's here, And because it's doing this, that's why the light is stretching. That's why we're seeing that red shift, because the light is actually stretching, because the fabric of the balloon, if you will, is stretching out as well. Right. So that's just one thing. And again, I wish I had more time to dive deeper into that. But I think there's so many reasons that we should take the book of Revelation, or book of Genesis, literally. And when we really start to dig, we might find that there are amazing solutions for the dates that we have today based on observations. And then there's some way, like the whole cosmic expansion, there's a way to actually put the two together. So it's not an either or, it's a both and, which is really cool.
Well, I think that what you get to is the age that is taught in our public school at the 7th grade level, basically, is trying to explain life without God. And I think I think that you would agree with this. The big mistake that pastors make that acquiesce to that is that trillions and trillions and trillions of death then would have brought life, and not that Adam's sin brought death into the world. And I think that's why they want to allegorize Genesis, so they don't have to have that fight with the friends that they respect,
right,
and get their insecurities met through academia sometimes. And I think when that bleeds into the church and the church leadership, we have guys that are very weak that bend to that. And it may not, there's things that happen in the church where you see that moral compromises or something might happen in with somebody that you respect athletically, somebody that you respect politically, something like that. But I think one of the things we haven't addressed very well is the insecurity of academics within our church, because that's not a very easy one to call out if you're not watching. And right. I think the other ones are very obvious. Mm-hmm. But I think what's happened in our church, most of our church pastors, even in the evangelical Christian churches across the country, whatever, most of them they have to go to Bible college in some cases. Now, maybe that's changing a little bit now, but we see that most of them are introverted and maybe have an intellectual personality. And so when they like to read, they like it. And so that's their social group too, possibly. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I see these things, and another guy came out, what was it, William Lane Craig, who talks, just things about about like the rapture, and how the idea of the rapture was created in like Scotland in the 1780s or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I just think, I think, well, first of all, I think to do that, you have to smash terms together to take out the gathering or whatever. Mm-hmm. But right. Before we get too far into it, I think one of the things I brought it up earlier, I think one of the things that we're really missing across the board in our churches is the problem that we see in Genesis chapter 6 and the obvious names that present themselves there. We have the Sethite theory, where we have the sons of Seth, or what's been called the Nephilim in Genesis chapter 6. Mm-hmm. Because, the average guy reads their NIV, and it says that they began to call on the name of the Lord in 426. Mm-hmm. And then we have this Nephilim problem that apparently is, if you believe that theory, is really no big deal, because obviously the whole earth just gets flooded in mass genocide. And then afterwards, you have this group of people, apparently, I think that the scholarship then stops on that. They don't really want to talk about after that, because pretty much everybody that Israel is fighting, is, or at least a lot of the people that they don't want to fight, they're scared of many times, it is the Rephaim. And so I was wanting you to take us through that a little bit, because I don't think 50%, I don't know what you would think, 50% of churches even bother to work through this. And it's a major problem from Genesis chapter 6 to what? 2 Chronicles, maybe?
As far as the Rephaim and the
Rephaim.
Yeah, right.
So one time I heard, well, the Bible doesn't say much about it. But I think
Yeah,
that's just an ignorant. I don't think
that's
it's.
right.
I think people
Yeah.
haven't taken the time to learn,
Mhm.
and I think it's such a great discovery for people to happen on your ministry and watch you take them through. So just let me shut up and why don't you take us through that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Well, so I'll start with Genesis 4:26. Um, so yeah, in the Hebrew, it doesn't say then men began to call on the name of the Lord, right? The word men is absent from the text. And if you have a New King James, people see that it's in italics because it's not in the text. And actually, what's going on in the Hebrew is it's not an active verb. The word began, it's actually passive. So at the very best, we could say then was begun calling on the name of the Lord. That's a possibility. However, this root, chet lamed lamed, most of the time, in most of the instances in this this root, it actually means to profane, and so it's a little bit of a challenge, right? But did people start calling on the name of the Lord, or was calling on the name of the Lord profaned? And I think that makes a lot more sense. First of all, it's in the passive voice. And there was a change, right? Something changed. It wasn't that they started calling, they already had the name of Yehovah. And at this point, it's going from bad to worse, right? We go from perfection, then we go
Wait.
to
Did
the
you
fall.
say you said Yehovah, not Yahweh, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. That's a little dig there. Okay, go ahead.
I'll take it who.
That's just
It's fine.
you
Whatever.
got
We don't have to fight about it.
no, it's not dig at you. I agree. I
Yeah.
totally agree. But in
Yeah.
case that slid by,
Okay.
there may be a little study out there that some people need to do when you're talking about the name of the Lord. Thank you, Doug. But anyway,
Yeah,
go
sure,
ahead.
absolutely. So anyway, you go from perfection, you go then to the fall. Then we have the recording of the first murder, right? We're starting to see a trend here, right? Things are going from amazing, and we got this downward trend until we get to Genesis 4:26, right? So we've had the first murder, and then what happens? Well, then calling on the name of the Lord is profaned. Oh my. And then what's the next thing on our downward pitch? Then we come to the Nephilim, right? That's when the sons of God came and they took the daughters of men, right? So it's this trajectory downward, not upward. It's not like we're going along and then there's a little bump and then we go down again. No, it's just down. And so that's a major part of Genesis 1 through 11 is how did we get so messed up? Well, here's how. All right, we started perfect. Sin came into the world. Then we had the first murder. Then people again began to call or began to, well, then people profaned calling on the Lord, excuse me. And then we have the Nephilim. And the Nephilim is an absolutely integral part of the Bible because if we leave that out, then we have a genocidal, really mean, sadistic kind of God who's just like, I'm just tired of people and I'm going to destroy everybody. However, if we have the sons of God who are fallen angels coming down, mating with women and creating a hybridized race, well, now we have pretty good grounds for destroying the earth because it says that all flesh corrupted their way, right? All flesh. This is a fleshy thing. This is a DNA thing, that everything was corrupted because of what the sons of God did. And if we leave that out of the Bible, you're going to be sorely confused in many places.
And do you include animals in that as well?
Possibly. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say a lot. We do see in the Genesis Apocrypha, in the Book of the Giants, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, that they talk about how they made monsters. And I know some people have suggested that's maybe where the dinosaurs came from. I don't know. Maybe.
Well,
I think
I would say there's another problem that we experience, and this is one of the reasons I started looking into this so greatly early, partway through my ministry in the church, is you have a real struggle with legalism in probably every well-intentioned church, right? And what I see is if you read the if you become a good, you're a good boy, you're reading your Old Testament, right? You're going through, you're gonna, just what you mentioned, is oversighted so much, because that's not a children's story. We teach it in our Bible school. Noah, he built him an arky.
Yep.
That's a genocide. There were no 7-year-old little girls that made it through that. There was no, right. You had 8 people on a boat. Also later, and I'll let you get to it, but you have cities that get wiped out. And if you read that and then you superimpose that onto the life that we're living today, right? Let's say I'm struggling with a sin over and over. Let's say a person is struggling with a sin and they've been a Christian for 25 years. When does God hit that? It's kind of like a glass of water. You can't quite see it filling up, but pretty soon the wrath of God is going to spill over and he's going to strike you dead. You're not going to heaven anymore, whatever. And I think that's what you feel as a well-intentioned Christian when you start reading the Old Testament without the proper teaching of Genesis chapter 6, or really any of the cities that get wiped out in that manner where God kind of stays consistent to save. You don't see that God is doing this to save, the opportunity to save you and me and spend eternity. You see it as he's genocidal. He was angry. He blew up and they didn't know, right? They were just sinning and they sinned a little more. He blew up and they didn't know. That's what's being taught all over the country, I think, because of some of these guys in church history that changed the teachings of Genesis 6 and them. Okay, so I'll let you get back to it. But.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really unfortunate. Julius Africanus was one of the first. He hinted at it, and then it was really Augustine who kind of made it official church doctrine. They were embarrassed by this whole teaching of the Nephilim and the sons of God and all this different stuff. But here's the danger: is I think that, I don't know, probably 80% of biblical skeptics were once in the church and they were being taught, and they were taught that God, destroyed the earth, but there's nothing about Nephilim and none of that stuff. And then they grew up and they said, wait a second, you want me to believe that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, but God so hated the world that he destroyed it in a flood just because people weren't being nice? Like, what's going on with that? And I think these people are very logical. And I agree with them a lot, that if you take out these key parts of the story, then God looks like a sadistical maniac that you're like, I don't know if I'd really want to hang out with that God. He sounds like a real loser or just kind of crazed.
Well, or the other thing is just deal with it. God's sovereign, and he had a reason, but he tells us the reason, right? He tells us. So
well, and again, if people say, well, if God is sovereign and this is how God is, then I want nothing to do with God. And so I think that we've created a lot of the skeptics because we've not given them the full story. We've actually withheld part of the story, and they're like, well, then I just can't understand it. It's a God that I don't want anything to do with. So I think we omit those parts at our own peril, as a church as a whole, when we do that. But really, when you start to look into this and you start saying, wait a second, this is in the Bible. This is the absolute reason for the flood. This is the reason that God said to wipe out the Canaanites, because there were Nephilim there. Nephilim, Anakim, Zamzumim, Rephaim, they're all one and the same thing, more or less. And in my book, Corrupting Image 2, I go into detail and I show how the gods of the ancient world are related to these. So God says to Abraham that know for certain his descendants will be slaves in Egypt, and then he'll take them out in the 4th generation, because the sin or the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. It turns out that the name of the god of the Amorites was Martu, and Martu and Marduk are pretty much the same thing, right?
It's very similar.
Yeah, and when you start looking at the symbols that represent these various gods, they're the same symbols. That tells you that they're talking about the same God. And it goes back to this guy named Ninurta, who is actually Nimrod, right? So he was known in the ancient world not by Nimrod, but by Ninurta, and he was the son of Enlil, the son of Satan, right? I mean, it's just It's like, wow,
Now
it's all in there.
that explanation right there. What percentage of pastors, if you were to take 100 pastors and put them in a room of good Bible teaching churches, let's knock out the denominational guys. We're not going to try to guess Catholic, Lutheran. Let's just talk about Southern Baptist, whoever. Out of 100, how many would even know what you just said about Ninurta and all that?
Probably less than 1%. I would suspect.
So what Doug said, cross the line, is your pastor's in 1%. So I like that. No, I actually think that guys that know me are laughing right now. But hey, the thing is, that's a horrible thing.
Right.
That is a horrible, horrible reality that we're living because, okay, then also let's say your average guy, right, is out here and he just watched Joe Rogan's podcast. And on Joe Rogan's podcast, they talked about that he had a guy from the CIA or Navy intelligence, and they definitely think there's a UFO, and they definitely think this, and they definitely think that. And it challenges the average 24, 25-year-old Christian believer's faith because he's watching that as well. He's never heard of the Nephilim, Rephaim.
Right.
He thinks he also thinks maybe his pastor taught the gap theory. And he thinks that we evolved, from an amoeba and a rock or whatever somebody wants to say. And ancient man was really stupid, but yet we find all these amazing feats of technology in the ancient world, possibly with megalithic structures and things on the wall that we can't really explain. What is that? But then we're starting to see things today, possibly. And we think that's not in the Bible. Well, there's nowhere we could see that in the Bible. And you're telling me that of course that's in the Bible. And in fact, it's all over the place.
Right. Yeah, that's an absolutely great point because, the evidence for unidentified flying objects, or now they're called UAPs, right? Unidentified aerial phenomenon, is mounting stronger and stronger and stronger. The Navy released some things from like 2004 and other times where you can, the pilot is in there and they've got their cameras on and there's something out there. They're chasing this thing and it leaves them like it's nothing, right? And, it's real. Whatever it is, it's real. We have to come to that conclusion. We can't say what it is, at least not from a technological, scientific point of view, but it's absolutely real. And the behavior of these things is what we find in the Bible, right? That it talks about how Satan is able to transform, right? He's a transformer. He's a shapeshifter. That's just one of the things. That these are interdimensional beings that exist. And that is the conclusion that many people are coming to. And we can't sweep this under the rug anymore. And if we didn't understand about the Nephilim, then there would be no explanation for this. You might just say, well, I guess there really are aliens out there and maybe we did all evolve. And that's what Satan wants us to believe, that we just evolved from nothing, or that our alien brothers from some other galaxy decided to start life here on planet Earth and we're related. I think this is all part of the end times deception. And a lot of the ignorance that the church has is playing right into that because they're not willing to go back and say, what does the text say? That's what we have to ask ourselves. What does the text say? At the end of the day, that's what we have.
Well, I think we have an informed decision that we can make if we understand the Bible when it talks about, let's say, the Rephaim and what happened there, and even what they're, what people would call fallen angels, what choices they were able to make in their relationship with mankind and corrupt the flesh. And then we have a really handy verse that maybe we're starting to experience some of, is in the end days, it returns to as the days of Noah.
Right.
And what was happening in the days of Noah, corrupted flesh from the Nephilim and stuff like that. So I think we have a real problem in the church, and most of it's with church leadership. That kind of seems to be a consistent theme throughout God's people in his word.
Sure.
And, I think our desire ought to be to do as well as we can. I'm just wondering do you see corrupting the image 2, corrupting the image 3, which are all great books that everybody should read them, because I think it gives a perspective that people don't get. But also, like, since you do that all the time, do you encounter a certain arrogance from guys that maybe they're 30 years in the ministry, they've never taught on it, they didn't really even know about it, and it's kind of like one thing I did, I have a biblical worldview class that I'm teaching tonight at our church. Actually, I called a prominent Christian college of the Restoration movement. Okay, so, and I said, would you please send me what you teach the college students on Genesis chapter 6 and if there's options and whatever. Do you know that it's all of 3 paragraphs? It's for their whole college. So you're talking a BA in pastoral ministry. You're talking senior pastors. The academic side is 3 paragraphs, and you're talking about a lot of church leaders. I mean, we look at the Bible. You're only missing a swath. If we cut out 426, you're only missing a swath from Genesis chapter 6 clear into 2 Chronicles. That to me is a worldview problem. It creates a theological problem, ideas about God. It creates a lot of doctrinal problems. How do I look at the world? So I don't know. I think some of the things that you're putting. Could you tell them too? And maybe this is just more something. I think the people who are watching this from Lincoln, Nebraska, that maybe didn't know what do you call it, the stele or
the stele?
Yeah. Can you talk about that
from Mount Herman?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So as I was writing Corrupting Image 2, I was looking into a reference to an inscription that was found on top of Mount Herman. And so I wanted to go and look at it for myself, because I don't know, I'm a little skeptical. Okay. And so I wanted to see it. And as I was looking at the actual inscription, I discovered a word that just isn't Greek. This inscription is from Greek, and it says, according to the command of the holy God, those taking an oath proceed from here. Okay. That's what the literature was telling me. But when I was looking at the inscription for myself, what I found is that there's this word batios, and I was able to trace that back. Long story short, very long story short, I was able to trace that back, that the word bat or bad is actually a secret name of Enlil, who is Satan. And
now,
that kind of blew me away.
Why would you use the word secret? What you mean? It's just hard to tell where we're at today, or?
Yeah, well, so it's a secret because when it's a little hard to explain without getting into too much Sumerian. I don't want to geek people out. But basically, when you look at a piece of cuneiform, okay, like cuneiform looks like chicken scratch, and each of those symbols has a name, but it's not necessarily the name. When you're reading it, you wouldn't say that name. The closest we have in English is when we say "w" versus W, right? We say W, that's the name of the letter, but that's not the sound of the letter.
Right.
And so that's the basic idea, is that this symbol has a name and only a scribe would know the name, but when they would pronounce it, when they would read it, it sounded like something else. And so what was happening is they took the name of this symbol for Enlil, and they just transliterated it into Greek, and it comes out as batios. And what they were doing, this is a conscious syncretism. They're saying, look, we understand that Dagon and Enlil and Marduk, they're all the same guy. And so we're just going to use this symbol so that it's just kind of a shorthand. Like, we're talking about this God, right? He's got a different name over here and a different name over here, but it's all the same guy. And so what they did by putting that name in there is they're saying that it was by the command of Satan that the angels came down in the days of Noah, and that's when they took women to themselves for this whole Nephilim project that they cooked up. But it was Satan's idea.
So not only in this, in any other area of study of the Bible, if you were able to see something clearly in the Bible that has a name trail, right? So could you just give us a quick rundown from Nephilim to what is this? Basically talking about the same thing in the Bible when you read it. So
so you have the Nephilim, you've got the Anakim, you have the Zamzumim, the Amim, the Rephaim. I think I'm forgetting one, but
a lot.
But yeah. There's a lot of names for them. Mm-hmm.
And so, would any of those? And I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot, but would any of those be descriptive? Like so they're Hebrew names at that point, right? Because in Greek they just said we're going to call these guys Gigante, right? Is that what they use?
So, well, that's another word. If we look at the Greek, the word gigas means literally it's a hybridite, right? So it's a half human, half god, quote in quotes there, being, right? So this is a demigod, as it were.
So your Bible is saying in Greek,
yes,
demigod.
Absolutely, yes.
In the story in Genesis chapter 6, even in so there would be a difference because you're reading it in the day of Jesus. You're reading the Septuagint, right? So Probably. It would have been. I think
Jesus was reading Hebrew, frankly, but a
lot
of
Jesus was reading Hebrew. But was he quoting the Septuagint when he was quoting the Old Testament?
When he was having, I don't think so. I don't think when he was having his discussions with the people on the streets, it was all in Hebrew, and he would have quoted Hebrew. But when it comes to us in the New Testament, then yes, then it's given to us in Greek, and that's when they used Septuagint.
Now, the New Testament writers, do you find that then they're quoting or they're referencing the Septuagint, or is it only because we're reading that in Greek?
A lot of times they're referencing the Septuagint, but sometimes we do find Hebraism. So there's still a Hebrew train of thought, but it's being put into Greek.
Because it's pretty popular for people to say, well, Jesus spoke Aramaic.
Yeah, I've got a book on that.
One of the advantages of Aramaic, right, was that they translated certain books of the Old Testament using Aramaic. Is that right? It's like a Talmud, or what do we call that?
Yeah, the Targumim.
Yes.
Yeah, I would absolutely say that Jesus spoke Hebrew. And my book, Discovering the Language of Jesus, Hebrew or Aramaic, I argue very strongly, and I showed the evidence for Hebrew and not Aramaic. That is something that was started in 1850s by Abraham Geiger. He came up with this idea that Hebrew was a dead language, but it wasn't a dead language. It was very much a living language. And Hebrew doesn't mean Aramaic, even though many of our Bible translations, they take the word Ebraisti, which is Hebrew, and they put in the word Suristi, which is Aramaic. And I think that is absolutely wrong. I think it's wrong,
But we repeat the same mistake in the church pulpits over and over and over, right. Don't we? I mean, right. You must just shake your head sometimes. Like
sometimes you got to throw your hands up and say, whatever. I can't change the whole world.
But if they're watching our podcast today, they can get it right with just a little bit of help.
I hope
from Doug Hamp, right?
Yeah. They can get more of my resources at douglashamp.com if they're interested in any of those. So they're available as ebooks, or they can go to Amazon and just look me up. I've got a whole bunch of books there.
And a lot of your articles, people can just click on them and read them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, and they've got a lot of information there. And really, in some of the articles that you put there for people to read, it takes the verse, parses it out. You can see sometimes if there's a mistake, or you have articles with the name trail of the Nephilim to the Rephaim and to every group then in the Old Testament where it equals. And I think that's the normal person can read that. They don't have to be going after their doctorate in Greek or Hebrew to understand that. It's very simple. You've made it very very explainable for people. I hope that more pastors and people in the independent Christian church and the Church of Christ and things like that will take part of the restoration movement, where they're teaching that the Bible is 100% the Word of God. I hope that they take some of these things that you fleshed out, and I hope that they add that to their solid Bible study, because reasons that we talked about today. And let me just tell you guys that are watching, Doug can get further into this, and I hope he'll come back sometime, because I love for him to take us through a little bit of this stuff. The symbols that we saw, some of the ways that the teaching has come to the church today. I just don't think we should land on it the way that we have in some cases. And I think you can see it. This particular video podcast, whatever you want to call it, is to help your ministry, right? And so you're going to witness to smart people who have legitimate questions. And I just think that using some of Doug's resources, and hate to brag on you while you're here, but I think it can really help your ministry in witnessing to people who are shaky about their faith. So, hey, I'm so glad that you came on. It's 5:06. I wish we had another hour, because there's so much good stuff here, and we're basically scratching the start of what Doug does, and he can take us through. And so if you want to hear Doug, we hope to schedule a time for him in the spring to come speak with us again, at least preach for us on a weekend. And hopefully we'll be able to have you back, and we can flush some of this stuff out.
I'd love to. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much. And guys, we will see you later. We leave these up on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. So, hey, use part of this to help your ministry. And we're so glad you guys visited by. I love you guys. Win people to Christ. All right. Thanks.